Welcome to the Innovative Systems Podcast, Broadband Breakdown, where we dive into real-life challenges broadband leaders are facing and help them find solutions. This is your space for innovative ideas and expert solutions. Let's get started.
Today, I have the pleasure of having Jason Smith, CEO of Rainbow Communications, with me. Jason, thank you for joining.
Ryan, hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the chance to have the conversation today.
Hey, one of the things that I keep hearing, and one I've believed for a really long times, is if not, but when it comes to cyber attacks affecting our industry and affecting our companies. Now, you had something, incident recently, or about a little over a year ago almost, right?
Last fall.
Last fall. Okay.
Last fall.
And so I wanted to get your take on it, starting off with, the emotions you went through and everything and how it treated you. So
Oh, sure.
how did you find out what happened, and kind of give me a little background on how it all happened?
Sure. Well, our on-call technician actually received an alert on a Sunday morning, about 3:30 a.m., I believe, and was seeing some odd things going on and couldn't access the network from his home to clear the error. So he came to the office. And once he got there, he could see that things weren't as they should be. Things, you know, um, maybe some things were open, some things were moving around that shouldn't be moving around. Things looked
Oh,
a little
wow.
interesting. So at that point, he engaged his supervisor and our director of operations, and they got looking into it, and our IT department. And at that point, I got a call about 5:30 in the morning, about 2 hours later, and said, "Hey, we think we've had an issue. We may have had a cyber attack." And so, 5:30 in the morning on a Sunday, I'm a little bit groggy. Hadn't had my first cup of coffee yet, but got my wits about me. And by the time I got into the office, about an hour and a half later, that they were still going through things, and had a chance to meet with the team, and we were sure at that point that we had a cyber attack at that time. First call I made was to my insurance company. I got a hold of my insurance agent, said, "Hey, this is what's going on. We think we've had a cyber attack. Where do we go? What happened?"
Okay.
And they were great. Like I said, I made that call at 8:30 that morning. Within the hour, with our insurance company, we were lined up. We had legal. Uh, we had a legal team involved, and we had a restoration team involved. And
Wow.
by 11 o'clock, we were having our restoration meetings that morning about what we're going to do, and had everything signed off on. So from that point, I they did great for us, and really, the process was really easy. Unfortunately, we didn't really have an incident response plan, but we will
I was going to
now.
ask you that. It seems like you were right on it to have
Uh,
all that going
I
on,
knew
but
that was my first call. I knew that
okay.
was my first call. How I knew that, I think it was just coming from some different conversations I had with people. Go, where'd I go? And so that's definitely part of an instant response plan that we are putting together now to prevent that in the future. Because if anybody needs to make that call, we need them to be able to get that process started. But once we made that call, then the insurance company pretty much took over at that point. I mean, they're the
Okay.
ones that are dealing with the risk at that point of, what this could cost, and things like that. So they took over. We had our IT staff in. Um, you know, they came out. So we had a meeting at 11 o'clock. We went through, what we knew, what was going on, and what we're looking at. The service issues that we were coming across was our broadband service was becoming very intermittent.
Oh,
Some
really?
areas were working, some were not. It was up and down as they were moving through things, and trying to figure out the cause of that. So once we were able to get all together, we got a plan of action in place, and here's what's going to happen. Uh, Probably the lowest point of the whole day. Um, we have a operations meeting room with two screens on the wall. And it felt like I was in the White House Situation Room. I'm sitting at this table, and I've got all our technicians around us, And I've got our director of ops there and our network manager, everybody that's involved, IT people, which they were just phenomenal. But we're all sitting around this, and I remember asking the question of the restoration team, as at this point, how long do you think we'll possibly be down? How long will our services be down? And they said, I would plan on 5 days.
Ooh. And this was affecting your all your
All
broadband
our broadband
services
customers.
because they were
Exactly.
hitting.
And
Gosh.
that was probably one of the lowest moments I've ever had in my almost 30 years of working here. Um, and around that table, the most interesting thing happened that day, that I can't explain it because I was there, but all the heads just kind of went, uh,
What a defeating moment.
yeah. But the next second, they all came up and let's get to work. And
Okay.
that was one of the coolest moments I've ever been a part of, too. It spoke so much to our culture and
Yes.
things we've talked about taking care of our customers and getting to work and finding solutions and doing that. And they got on it and they worked through the problems and, worked through the solutions with the restoration team. And we had clean backups on everything, which was phenomenal. So by 10 o'clock that night, we had our broadband services restored. We had everything actually restored that night and felt we were in a good place. So by 10 o'clock at night, for what was going to be 5 days earlier in the morning, by 10 o'clock, hey, we're thinking things are great, right? And and so let's clean up some things. I think about 10:30 that night, I went home. Okay, I'm going to rest easy. Things are going to be great. I get a call at 12:30 from our director of ops. He goes, "We got a problem. We don't know if something happened again or what." And so, okay, so let's take a look at it. Um, got into it, working the restoration team. We had to restore an offsite backup. And
Okay.
it was only affecting our voice customers on our hosted platforms. So all our
Okay.
business customers, but our broadband service was up and going. But the restoration of this on-site backup, we actually found a flaw in the transmittal rates of how that was transmitting back to restore our services, and it was quite a bit slower than it should have been.
Ah.
So we end up having issues for about 3 days of no hosted, which in turn took down our office as well. So we couldn't communicate with anyone, and we had broadband, and so we had to reposition some things. We got some emergency numbers out for emergency contacts. Our customer relations team reached out to our business customers, kept them apprised of what's going on. Our marketing team did a great job of keeping customer messaging going along. Uh, what was great, I said we had a legal team. They were advising our communication the whole way. We followed their game plan.
Okay.
So we didn't step outside and say something we could not say. We stayed within their parameters, and that was our messaging. But that went really well. It got to the point by day two, we had people bringing us food and cookies and stuff, telling us how much they were been thinking of us. And obviously there was a lot of frustration, but we have 2,000 hosted PBX seats that aren't working. That's a big deal. And so, but we got through that point. And so we were all restored by that Wednesday. We actually, our timing said it was going to be Thursday. It was by that Wednesday. We got everything up and going and got things solidified at that point. So it was not a great time. Um, you know, like you said earlier, it was not if, but when situation.
Mm.
But I've learned a lot about our organization during it too. Like I said, it was such a culture defining moment that I saw our core values as an organization lived out by the whole organization through that. Taking care of people and customer experience, doing our best we could get through that. Hey, how can we improve this so this doesn't happen again? You know, being the right size of company so we can reach out to those customers and know our customers. It just showed who we were. as an organization, and that was cool. And our people were just phenomenal. I think at first, there was some worry. You know, hey, we're going to get terminated over this. And, my answer is like, well, I can't fix it. So, no, absolutely not. But no, I mean, that was never a thought. That, we believe in our people and we needed them and they performed and we got things up and going.
So I've got to ask, were you ever contacted by the cyber criminals?
Yeah, there was a message, and actually, that was a nice thing about the restoration team. They took over that negotiation piece.
Okay.
Okay, so I never was in contact with them. I worked through the third party the whole way. Okay,
Wonderful. Okay.
and to back up on something else too, Brian, talk about organizationally. Obviously we're a co-op, and I have a board of directors that I have to keep informed
Right.
on these things. I made a call at 10:30 that morning to my board president. And I texted him. I said, "Hey, you got a minute?" And he goes, "Well, hey, I'm in church. Do I need to step out?" And I said, "Yes, you need to step out."
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I updated him what's going on, and then we had an old conference bridge that we used, and I had about 3 board calls that day, just to keep them informed and on the messaging and things like that. And that was important too, because people would have gone to them. I need them to know what we're doing. I need to
Correct.
keep them involved. And I also need to let them know that, hey, we've got this. We're getting this taken care of. You don't overextend yourself and do something that, it's going to make things not work out. And they were phenomenal as well. The support we had from our board of directors was just phenomenal, and down through the whole organization. Another thing I was
Well,
so
hold on. On that point, let me ask, because that's one of the key things I always find: transparency and accountability, right?
Yep.
That's what you told me you basically did there. Like, we are going to be accountable to what we did,
Yep.
and we're going to be transparent so that we can have the consistent message.
Yep.
And I think that goes such a long way. And when you have the culture like you guys do, you don't have to worry about, am I going to get fired over this or something going to happen? Look, we're in this together, and
Yeah.
we're going to communicate what we legally can,
Right.
rightfully, not go off script, not create more issues.
Right.
But also letting the people that need to know what's going on, and they're not making up excuses or making up bad stories and going to Facebook or something like that
Right.
either.
Right. We just we towed the message, we towed the line. Like I said, it waterfalled down through our staff, up through our board. We were in constant communication. We owned it. I mean, we owned
Yeah.
it. Like I said, we owned it, but we're going to get it up and going and go from there. Another thing that was just so important, and the people, our managers and IT staff that was working on it, and everybody. Another thing I thought was just so neat through the whole thing was everybody kept a cool head. There was not
Yeah.
one person that lost their cool, exploded, got upset. You don't know how much that took the edge off too. You're already in an
Yes.
intense situation, and be able to stay focused and cool under that type of pressure was amazing. And I attribute a lot of our success for restoration of that is we spent our time focused on the solution, not pointing the finger. And that was to me another part really spoke to our culture as well. We were there to get it back up and going, not time to sit and play the blame game.
Not at all.
Yeah.
That is great to hear. It does sound like, for Rainbow, what a moment proving out
Yep.
all the effort that you and your leadership team and your board have put into creating the culture you have there.
I did. I was never as I said it. I was never as down and never as proud at one moment.
That's
I,
impressive.
yeah, it did. It was a great learning situation. Um, and I've gone to conferences. We all have. We've gone to these things. We've heard about cybersecurity. Hey, you got to have this plan in place and this, and I can never get my hand. It was just hard to put my head around. What's that really mean? And like I said, I know the instant response plan was the first call was to the insurance company, and our
Well,
IT staff knew to call me. But what I learned through the process, though, is helping us be so much better, and not just me, our whole team,
correct.
what we've learned through this process is just going to make us so much better because we've lived it now. We
Yes.
understand it's real. We understand it. We understand what happened. So, so since November, what have we done? Well, we spent our time, hardening the network,
Mhm.
working with, let's make sure this doesn't happen again. Let's put it on our best controls in place. We talked about the type of training we're going to be doing. This is all going into a plan and it's still in development. It's not done, but we're working through this, constantly now. And it's the incident's still not over. I mean, we just had to send out our last customer notifications that were along with
Okay.
that too. But luckily, we were very lucky. They did not get into our main customer database. So any major, payment information, bank account, that wasn't.
None of that was
We
corrupted.
had some issues with some information that was found on maybe some shared drives. And I think I would maybe echo what I heard at another conference or someone say, you really need to keep stuff from 10 years ago. I think, file management, I think is one thing I learned. What do we really need to keep? Do we, as a
Yep.
Lifeline application from 15 years ago, do you really need to keep that? And so those are kind of some things. And hey, I'm just as guilty as anybody. I save it, put it in the file, and I never go back and review what I've got. And so, some of those file policies, those things, that's stuff we're going to be looking at. What we really need to keep.
So it's interesting. I had just a few weeks ago a conversation with one of the insurance company CEOs, and we got into that topic specifically about where do you, why do you need all this data? What PPI do you have just laying around both either in systems, file folders, or even still paper copies? I can't remember how many customers I've walked into and they laugh like, oh, don't go in that room. It's full of boxes from gosh knows where. And in those papers are social security numbers
Hmm.
and membership forms that have
Sure.
all that information,
Yep.
or there are memberships forms locked in your system that aren't locked down.
But,
So
we had a pretty good handle on the, paper copies. We did a big, cleanup on a lot of the old records, getting rid of what we need to keep, and actually had kind of a system going of, okay, once this gets beyond the maximum time you're required to hold something, it's
right.
time to shred it and be gone with it. But we didn't really have that on the digital side, and
Yep.
that's going to be one of the next steps as well. Is that we what are we really keeping? If we have to keep some stuff that has some sensitive information, how do we lock that down even further beyond a couple more steps? And so, um, lessons learned. Like I said, we got a whole page of them, and maybe a page and a half. But there's a lot of lessons learned through the whole thing. I don't want to do it again. Don't get me wrong, but
No.
it was definitely better than hearing about it at a conference. I definitely know, I know what we need to do. And we've been pretty open about sharing the story of what we can share. Because again, like I said, the if not when, it's going to
Yeah.
happen to somebody else. And, one of the things that I was really surprised about, um, when I found out who the perpetrator was, and we had to go through the ransom piece and the things like that, was I they would posted something out. I started getting calls one day from all these um, security like websites and magazines wanting to do an interview. I'm going, what's this all about? Well, you know, they could see where like a threat was being made that they were going to release some of these files, and I can go and look on a website that was not on the dark web, and I go, heck yeah, that's one of our reports. I can tell they got that fuzzed out, but I know the color combination. That's it. My accountant does that for me all the time. And so I recognize that. So that was interesting. So I watched that for a few days. Of course, I didn't do any of the interviews, but I watched that for a few days. And what really was interesting, when I first got on there, like we were number one on the list, and like a day and a half later, we're like on page 15.
Yeah.
It's just like on, wow, this is just constant. And so that was a real eye opener to me, going, and I'm thinking about, we had IT staff, and, if people didn't have those resources where they would be, we were able to turn things around pretty quickly, and respond. That's one thing I've preached a lot, in the last year, and even through this event, I said, guys, I said, we don't react. we're not going to react to anything, but we're going to respond appropriately. And
There we go.
this cybersecurity incident definitely was one of those things. We didn't start making rash decisions. We didn't, let's stay the course. Let's respond appropriately. Let's take the data that we got, make good decisions going forward. Hey, that's done. We can't undo the past, but
Right.
let's move forward in a positive way that can put us in a better position and put our customers in a better position. And so, that's what we really, really focused on.
And I think that's incredible. And I think the lessons learned is only going to help you out. Now, you made a comment like, we're still learning them and we're putting our policy together, our response plan together. My challenge to you is it never stops being put together
No, absolutely not. No.
because something else is going to change. There's going to be
Right.
a new piece of equipment added. There's always going to be something. And the other thing I would ask is before the dust completely settles, when do you as the CEO walk in again and say, "Hey, guess what, guys? We're going to do a
Oh,
tabletop.
no.
It
No.
all just happened again. Let's see how we do."
Yep. No, absolutely. That's part of our future plans is incorporating that type of training and things like that. Um, you talked about does it ever stop? And I'm going to hit back on one of our things. And this is, one of our 5 points of our core values is we can always improve.
Yep.
And that's one I take
Continuous
very
improvement.
seriously. We can always improve. Nothing stays static. If it does, we're going to be in trouble. So how are we going to keep learning? How are we going to keep improving on this process? What we write today probably won't be what we have in 3 years, but we got something to start on. And to be very, very much to your point, Brian, I'm a big believer in that. Always continuous daily improvement. I just got to be a
Yep.
little bit better tomorrow than I was today.
Exactly. Well, Jason, thank you so much for sharing your story. If I could ask you for just one thing, if you had someone that was listening to this and they're going, "Oh, where to start?" What would be the one thing you would recommend?
Uh, I think understanding what you have. I think understanding, just at the basic level, what's your network and where's your weak points, and are you getting it? If are your things being backed up? Are your backups in place? Are your endpoints secure? Just having a good handle on that and having an inventory on that as well, and understanding that, and then understanding the team as well. And then when we're talking about cybersecurity, we're not questioning their abilities, but this is a true enterprise risk that we're dealing with now.
Correct.
And so we're working together to make sure that we've got ourselves in the best position. So I think just having a clear understanding on where you're going with cybersecurity, you'll put your incident response plan together, you'll do your training. And I'm sure, everybody's situation is going to be a little bit different, but if you got good people, I can't, you know, number one, I cannot express my appreciation for our staff, uh,
Yep.
more than once. And in fact, just to give you a little nugget, I did something, one of our IT people, had his daughter for the weekend. When I showed up, she's sleeping on the office floor, little girl, and thought, "Oh, man," it's felt terrible about it. And of course, like I said, I can't do anything. I
Well,
can say yes, but I can't fix anything.
I disagree with that because if I listen to your story and talking to others, the one thing I think that I'm impressed with by your leadership is one, no panic, right? You
Right.
got the gut punch, but you handled it calm and cool. So you set that example for your team. And two, you didn't start micromanaging, you didn't start getting in the way. You
Yeah.
gave the team the bandwidth to do what they needed to do to get things done.
Yeah.
And as a leadership, I think that's so important because sometimes there's a gut reaction that, you want to get into the middle of everything,
Yeah.
but you knew your role and what you were supposed to provide and you did it. It sounds like perfectly.
Yeah. The last little nugget I got, and I'm not bragging about this by no means, but I did something. We had our people working on it, but they also had families in the
Oh yeah.
background, and their families had to get the kids to school. These guys didn't leave. They were here 40 hours straight. They
Mm.
didn't go home. They got parents they're taking care of. And I took a chance and I wrote a letter to each one of their wives and the one guy's daughter. I just thanked them so much for their support because without them, those guys couldn't have done what they did. And
Yep.
they're just as much part of our family and our team as the employees. And I just wanted to express my appreciation to them And I got some feedback from some of them, how much that meant to them. And I'm not saying that said, hey, look at me, look what I did. I'm just saying it was powerful to recognize that because it's true. They couldn't have done their job. If things weren't good at home, they couldn't have done what
No.
they were doing here.
And again, it just speaks to the culture you try to have and that you do have there. So, Jason, thank you so much for coming on board today and having this conversation. And I'm sure our paths will cross soon.
Oh, sure. Yeah, Brian, I appreciate the chance to talk. And, I don't mind talking about it because I think that's one thing I love about this industry. We all learn from each other.
I think that's true. That's true. And I'm sure people will be approaching you. So
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
have a great rest of your day, Jason. Thank
Will
you.
do.
That's a wrap for this episode of Broadband Breakdown. Got a problem you need advice on or a story to share? Reach out. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay connected and keep pushing for progress in rural America.